Hey all you cool cats and kittens. Ugh, I swore I wasn't going to do that. Welcome back to the ConfigMgr Technical Preview Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Zenerd. You can catch me on Twitter at TheZnerd. I know last time I said I would be attending MMS this year. Unfortunately, due to everything that's going on and MMS getting pushed back and the proximity to baby Z number 3, bless my wife for bringing a third nerd into this world. I unfortunately won't be attending this year, but I should be able to attend the Midway edition in the fall, provided everything ends up working out. Things are a little bit crazy right now, obviously, and I hope you're all staying safe, staying sane, and getting your fix of Tiger King.
'Cause I saw Tiger, now I understand.
This edition of the podcast is going to cover technical preview releases 2002.2 and 2003. The ConfigMgr team is absolutely killing it with the number of releases they have, but they're also absolutely killing me with the amount of content that we have to cover. These podcasts are going to be a little bit long, just like my hair and my beard. So let's get started with my top 3 features from 2002.2 and 2003. Coming in at number 1 in Technical Preview 2003, we now have the ability to track the history of remediated configuration items. This is awesome. So when a ConfigMgr client remediates a CI, it's going to generate a state message which gets stored in the database, and that entry in the database is exposed via a public view, v_CI remediation history. It's going to give you the ID of the configuration item as well as the resource ID and the date that it was remediated. So this can be super helpful in tracking potentially help desk tickets associated with changes that you've made to CI. So when a user complains that something broke on their machine and they don't know why, you can potentially link those tickets back now to a specific point in time and potentially remediate those issues in your CI, or even just track clients that are having issues. Maybe you've got a rogue user that's removing the setting and ConfigMgr continues to remediate it. So with that view exposed, now you can generate reports based on this and track those issues. So let's take a look at what this is going to look like inside of ConfigMgr. Inside of our ConfigMgr console on our technical preview lab here, we're going to expand assets and compliance settings, configuration items, and take a look at one of the compliance items that I've already created. If we right click on this and select properties, and then click on the Compliance Rules tab, you will see this new checkbox that's been exposed, Track Remediation History when supported. And what this is going to do, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's going to track the remediation history, or clients are going to track their remediation history and provide state messages when remediation takes place on the clients. Since we have track remediation history enabled on this particular CI, we should now be able to go into the database and see the history of the remediation for this CI. So if we open up SQL Server Management Studio here, expand our ConfigMgr database and the views folder, and we scroll down to v_CI remediation history, past it right there. If we select the top 1000 rows, we should see each time that this particular configuration item has been remediated, and in this case it will give us the CI ID, the resource ID, which is the machine that it remediated it on, and the remediation date in UTC. Now it's important to note that this is not an immediate process. There's going to be some delay in processing for this information to end up in the database. As a matter of fact, I've actually remediated this CI a couple of times already within the past 10 minutes, and we're still not seeing that information in the database. So don't expect immediate results in here. But now you should be able to track the remediation of CIs in your database, which you weren't previously able to do. Number 2 of my top 3 features coming from Technical Preview 2002 is the stupid simple ability to bring in ConfigMgr resources into the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center, which will allow you to run certain actions against devices that are in your ConfigMgr environment without necessarily having to cloud attach them. So when we enable this, we do this through the co-management blade. However, It doesn't require you to automatically join the devices to co-management, nor does it require you to offload any workloads to Intune. All we're doing is effectively bringing the devices into that single pane of management glass for ConfigMgr. 3 actions are available right now. We have the sync machine policy, the sync user policy, and the application evaluation cycle. This does require a global administrator to set up, so if you don't have global admin rights, make friends with your global admins. And by default, all devices get uploaded to the cloud, but you can limit this to a specific collection if you want to do some testing first. And anybody who's going to take actions against devices, their Azure Active Directory account and their AD account needs to be discovered in ConfigMgr. This shouldn't be a problem. Most of the time you're also synchronizing those accounts, so they should be one and the same. Additionally, they'll need the notify resource permission on the collection that the device belongs to, or a collection of the device belongs to. It's not currently supported in the government cloud, just the public cloud. Let's go ahead and set this up since I haven't done it in my tenant yet. Inside of our Configuration Manager console, if we open the administration blade, expand cloud services, right-click on co-management, and select configure co-management, since I haven't done it in this tenant or environment yet. We are given the opportunity to sign in with a global admin. Again, you can choose the environment, public cloud or US government cloud, but at this point, it is only supported in the public cloud. Well, let's go ahead and sign in with a global admin for my environment. Now we have the checkboxes to upload devices to Endpoint Configuration Manager Admin Center, and we also have the Enable Automatic Client Enrollment for co-management. Since this tenant doesn't have Intune, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck this box since I don't want to co-manage the devices, but I still want to manage them within the Admin Center. If we click the Next button, we'll see that it warns us that it's going to register an application to authorize synchronization. This is the reason it requires a global admin account. We'll go ahead and click yes to continue. And we're going to synchronize all of my devices since I don't have that many. You again can select a collection to limit this to if you would like to test it. And we'll click the next button again. And next. And this will set up the upload of devices into the admin center for us to do some basic admin tasks against the devices. We give this a few minutes to synchronize, and then if we open a web browser to devicemanagement.microsoft.com, log in with an account that has Intune privileges, which also has the necessary privileges and synchronization complete on the config manager side. So in my case, my domain admin account, don't shoot me, sorry. It is a technical preview lab after all. When we sign in here, we will be brought to the Admin Center portal. And if we expand the Devices section and select all devices, we'll now see this VS device that is managed by ConfigMgr listed in here. If we double click on it, we now have the ability to synchronize machine policy, synchronize user policy, and run the app evaluation cycle from here. If we click on this to sync machine policy, it's going to initiate a connection to the ConfigMgr site. And within just a few seconds, it should report back a status of complete. You'll notice a couple of fails in here, and I don't know if this is a limitation of this release at the technical preview or if this is something that is going to be fixed at a later date, but I did have to define the permissions for my account directly in the ConfigMgr console rather than a group like ConfigMgr admins. It didn't seem to work until I configured that account. Maybe it was just a synchronization timing issue, but I'll do a little bit more research and potentially submit a frown on this because that should be supported. Accounts belonging to groups that have the correct permissions should be able to initiate these actions within the admin center. Number 3 of my top 3 features, this one coming from Technical Preview 2003. You can now see which boundary group or groups a device belongs to within the ConfigMgr console. Helpful if you're troubleshooting content delivery, or maybe you have a device that belongs to multiple boundary groups and you're trying to figure out what's going on and where it belongs. This data updates every time a client makes a new location request, or at least updates once every 24 hours. It's only available at the primary site. Since this is site level data, you won't see this if you connect to the console for a CAS. Look forward to the next video where we talk about the actual current branch release, where you can collapse central administration sites if you have the ability to do so. Anyways, let's take a look at this in the console because it's super simple and it is readily exposed. In our ConfigMgr console, we'll go to Assets and Compliance and select Devices. Notice we get our standard set of columns here, but if we right-click on the columns section, we can select a Boundary Groups option now, and this will tell us which boundary groups a particular device belongs to. This will be comma separated if you have multiple boundary groups. In my case, I only have one boundary group in this particular environment, and this device belongs to that boundary group, all boundaries. So really cool, really easy, and gives you some really good insight that has been requested for a little bit of time from us ConfigMgr admins. Picking 3 top features for these 2 technical preview releases was really hard, so let's talk about the rest of the new features that have come out. Starting with Technical Preview 2002.2, we have new management insight rules for HTTPS configuration. So we have 2 new rules. One is sites that don't have proper HTTPS configuration. This is obviously going to list the sites that don't have HTTPS configured properly. This could possibly prevent devices synchronizing collection membership results to Azure AD groups, and it possibly also causes Azure AD sync to not upload all devices. So this is that feature that we talked about previously. Therefore, management of those devices may not function properly as well. The second rule is devices not uploaded to Azure AD. This is going to list all of the devices that haven't been updated or uploaded to Azure AD because the site isn't properly configured. To get either rule, you need to configure enhanced HTTP or at least one management point for HTTPS. However, these rules will not appear if you've previously configured the site for HTTPS communication. I'm not entirely sure why this is, but if you've been putting off enabling HTTPS, when you enable it, you're going to get some more management insights. Next, we have improvements to BitLocker management within ConfigMgr. If you haven't been paying attention, maybe living under a rock for the past year, the ConfigMgr team has been working to bring MBAM, Microsoft BitLocker administration and monitoring under the ConfigMgr scope, which is really cool. Reduce the amount of infrastructure that you're going to have in your environment. The ConfigMgr team this time is bringing a little bit of a reduction in the amount of configuration for secure communications necessary. So in the past, you've needed to have a management point that was configured for HTTPS communication. In this release, you only need to have the certificate applied to the IIS site that hosts the recovery certificate. You don't have to have a full-blown HTTPS management point to facilitate secure communication of recovery keys from the client to the database. Now look, if you're still having issues with configuring PKI or configuring certificates and HTTPS communication within your site, let's talk, because it's not that challenging, provided that you have some of the infrastructure in place already. And I'm happy to talk you through it or help you out there. But if you're still having issues or you've got some other issue that is precluding you from making this happen, you now have the ability to just apply the certificate to the IIS site for recovery services. ConfigMgr Technical Preview 2002.2 brings with it support for the ARM64 platform. So if you're managing devices like IoT devices that have ARM64 processors or OSs, that is now a supported OS version for configuration item platforms, application deployment type requirements, package program requirements, and task sequence advanced properties. If you've previously checked the box for the entire Windows 10 platform on these, you're going to need to go back and check the box for ARM64 if you want to add support for those four items listed, the configuration items, applications, packages, and task sequences. This is not enabled by default when the feature gets added to your ConfigMgr environment. Additionally, Technical Preview 2002.2 brings with it improvements to the search function within the console. You can now search all subfolders for configuration items and configuration baselines, so it'll make your searching a little bit easier configure for those items where you didn't have that before. If you manage macOS devices in your environment, Technical Preview 2002 includes support for macOS Catalina devices or 10.15. Intune also supports this platform, and honestly, when it comes to managing Macs, unless you're using Jamf, Intune might be a better platform to be doing this on. But if you're doing it from ConfigMgr, know that Technical Preview 2002.2 is going to support the latest macOS release. Technical Preview 2002.2 brings with it improvements to the Extend and Migrate on-premises site to Microsoft Azure tool. You can now provision multiple roles per single Azure VM. So if you wanted to bring a management point and a distribution point into Azure, it no longer requires multiple VMs. You do this by adding additional roles after the initial Azure VM deployment has been completed. The final new feature in ConfigMgr Technical Preview 2002.2 allows you to opt into new cloud-based features for Microsoft Endpoint Management Admin Center for your ConfigMgr on-premises installation. If you don't have quite the release cadence that Microsoft does with features in your environment, or you want to run those through change control first, you'll be able to opt into those rather than them being enabled automatically. Moving on to Technical Preview 2003, you now have the ability to onboard Microsoft Configuration Manager clients into Microsoft Defender ATP via the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center. So now you can deploy ATP EDR onboarding policies to ConfigMgr clients targeted at ConfigMgr collections rather than Azure AD groups. This basically allows you to onboard clients from a single management console, that being Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center. What's cool about this, though, is that the devices don't have to be joined to Azure AD or belong to MDM enrollment. The devices, we're enrolling them through a policy that's pushed down through the site. This is enabled at the top level site. Under the Cloud Sync tab, make this collection available to assign Microsoft Defender ATP policies in Intune. It is going to require still access to the MEM Admin Center. E5 license for Defender ATP, and then an MEM tenant attached ConfigMgr hierarchy. So this is, again, all the more reason for you to be attaching your ConfigMgr environment to Azure and to the cloud, because you're going to be missing the boat on a lot of new features that are coming out as the convergence of cloud management happens with your on-premises environment. Next, in Technical Preview 2003, we have improvements to providing feedback to Microsoft, and this comes with a new feedback wizard, which is going to provide you a little bit more guidance on providing good feedback to Microsoft so that they can respond to you without having to ask additional questions necessarily about what you're experiencing. This is only available in the ConfigMgr console for this release. Support Center has a similar feedback tool, but it is not updated for at least Technical Preview 2003 at this point. But when you go to submit a smile or a frown, you're going to get a little bit more guidance on what Microsoft is looking for in the feedback that you're providing to them. In previous podcasts, we've talked about improvements to the Microsoft Edge Management Dashboard. We have a new report coming at you again in the dashboard, Preferred Browser by Device. Basically, this is what browser was used most by the device in the past 7 days. So regardless of what is the default browser on the device, maybe the user is opening a different browser. This does require an additional hardware inventory class be selected. That's SMS_browser usage in the hardware inventory. But then as soon as you start collecting that data, you'll get a little bit of insight into what your users are using for browsers, even if maybe they've configured Firefox as the default, but they're using Edge instead, or probably more likely the opposite way around. Coming down to the final four for Technical Preview 2003, and actually all of the features that we've talked about, is improvements to the CMPivot utility. So now you can run CMPivot against an individual device. You can do this from the ConfigMgr console, or you can do it from CMPivot from an existing collection pivot, let's say. Let's take a look at this in the ConfigMgr console, because I want to show you one of the gotchas that I found in Technical Preview that I hope is fixed for the next release. In our Configuration Manager console, if we go to Assets and Compliance blade, expand devices, or actually let's go to Device Collections, right-click on a collection, we normally would experience the Start CMPivot from here. But if we go to Devices directly, right-click, we will now see the option to start CMPivot on a device. Interestingly enough, if we do this from a collection directly, we actually don't get that option here. I'm not sure if that was an oversight or just something that needs to be resolved in a future revision, but let's do this directly from the device under Devices. We start CMPivot and run just a standard query. Let's do the Azure AD status. We'll see that the job actually just executed against a single device rather than a collection of devices. If we right-click on the device, we can actually pivot to this device and say BIOS and get the results for this particular device. Obviously, this isn't super helpful when it comes to a single device, but if we were to do this, say, from a collection of all devices, all systems, start CMPivot, and let's say we did Azure AD join status here. Really only have one device that we can pivot against at this point, but notice we are pivoting from the all systems collection. When this result is returned, we can right click on the device in the list and pivot directly to another report in here for this device specifically, or we can just device pivot. And we get a new window here specific to this device rather than the collection. If you've been following along with the podcast, you know that in the previous release we had the ability via status message queries to see feedback submitted to Microsoft to make sure your employees were sending an appropriate amount of smiles along with any frowns that they might be sending. You can now view that with a query directly rather than going into status message queries. If, however, you've also been following along in your labs and applying every TP release, unfortunately, you're going to need to add this query manually. There's a link down below in the description on how to do this, but that shouldn't be a problem for your production environment when you roll out to current branch 2002. Now, some of you have been using the ConfigMgr SDK during your task sequences to show messages to your user using the show message method of the iProgress UI class or interface. In the past, this didn't return any values, so the ConfigMgr team has added a new method called showMessageEx or showMessageExtended, which is similar to what exists already, but it now includes a return result, which is an integer that matches the standard Windows message box return values. This is stored in pResult. If you're familiar with how to use the SDK, I'm assuming you're going to be familiar with how to grab the result from that window as well, but know that it just uses the standard integer return values from a standard Windows message box. Last but not least, we have improvements to OS deployment. Really two improvements here. We have an additional check in the check readiness steps to determine whether a device is booted with UEFI or BIOS. When you enable this check, it creates a new task sequence variable _ts_CR_UEFI. The value of 0 indicates that the device booted with BIOS mode. A value of 1 indicates the device booted in UEFI mode. Additionally, we have improvements to the task sequence progress view. If you enabled this previously, you would know that enabled steps within a disabled group were counted as the total number of steps that would be run as part of the task sequence. That is now no longer the case in this release of ConfigMgr Technical Preview. It only counts steps, or it doesn't count steps rather, that are enabled if they're part of a disabled group, making the count of total steps to be run more accurate. Well, that's going to wrap things up for the Technical Preview podcast for 2002.2 and 2003. I hope all of you are staying safe with this pandemic that is going on, practicing good social distancing measures, trying to find TP in your local grocery store. In honor of that, I had to update my Software Center icon for my Technical Preview environment to an empty roll of toilet paper. Hope I find some toilet paper soon. I'm down to my last couple of rolls. I might have to start bartering my firstborn child maybe for some rolls of toilet paper. Let's hope it doesn't come down to that. With that said, stay safe everyone. Hope you enjoyed this. If you've got any questions or comments, leave them down below. And I hope to see you next time. And until then, happy adminning.